What is going on, everybody? Today we've got something a little bit different, still in the mock draft realm. We'll be doing a one-round, no-trades mock draft today, and I'm joined by a special guest, if you'd like to introduce yourself to the viewers.
Hello, everyone. Name's Nickinator. I am Octi's podcast buddy, and I'm here to help out with a little mock draft here.
Yeah, so this isn't exactly the same thing as the podcast, of course, that we started last week, but we still wanted to do some draft-related content, and we wanted to try out a dual mock draft. So what we'll be doing today is we'll be alternating between draft picks. I have the odds, he has the evens. So with that, let's get this started. So with the first pick, of course, I have the odds, and that starts with the Chicago Bears. Unfortunately, since we're not doing trades today, the Bears have to stay with the number one pick, but they will gladly settle for Georgia defensive tackle Jalen Carter, who's probably the best pure player in the draft. Assuming the Bears do trade back, I think they should look to go no lower than 4. So ideally, either the Texans or the Colts moving up for a quarterback. That way the Bears could still get an absolute haul and still get one of the top 2 defensive players in the draft, whether that's Carter or Anderson. Since the Bears get to pick between both of them here, I think Jalen Carter is just a slightly better player. You can argue edge is a slightly more valuable position, but on the flip side, I think it's harder to get great interior defensive linemen. So if Jalen Carter can truly become great, then he can be the anchor of this defense for upwards of a decade. And boy, does that defense need a lot of help.
With the second pick, the Houston Texans are going to go with, of course, a QB, but this time we're going to C.J. Stroud from Ohio State. The way I see it, they're definitely going to go with a QB of some sort. And lately, the way the rankings have going, Bryce is probably the number one guy, but he's slowly falling. There's some measurement issues with his height and weight, hands, all that kind of stuff that makes other guys fall and maybe not as high on boards. And I think Stroud's slowly becoming possibly that number one guy. I think the Texans, whether they stay at 2 or go at 1, I would not be shocked if they go Stroud. They could even go a more of a project guy like Anthony Richardson. But getting Stroud here, I think, gives them a for sure bet that they're going to have a guy for the future to help out Dameon Pierce and whoever their receivers end up being.
So with the third pick, the Arizona Cardinals have Will Anderson fall to their lap, and that's ultimately the route that they're going to go with. I have seen some buzz that possibly Will Anderson might not be the first edge rusher off the board. According to Daniel Jeremiah, some teams really seem to like Tyree Wilson. The guy is a freak. He's got ridiculously long arms, and I think it could be a similar situation to Trayvon Walker being the number one pick last year based off of his athleticism and his upside rather than the production of the more proven players such as Aiden Hutchinson. I'm not ready to mock Tyree Wilson ahead of Will Anderson quite yet, and I think Will Anderson is probably the better prospect. So I think that's ultimately the route that the Cardinals should go with. With Carter off the board, I think it's a pretty easy pick for them.
With pick 4, Indianapolis Colts are going to get their franchise QB, but it's not who you think it's going to be. We're going to go Anthony Richardson, QB from Florida. His odds to go from number 1 overall went from 10,000 to plus 700. And the fact that it went so high so fast to me is shocking. And when you have a guy like Jim Irsay running the show behind the curtains, I think he's going to want a guy who could end up becoming a top 5 QB like Anthony Richardson, he has the arm, he has talent, and he can run, be like a Lamar Jackson type guy. I think Jim Irsay is going to force Shane Steichen to pick that QB, get AR, and turn him into a machine, but they're going to have to fix that O-line eventually.
So the Seahawks at 5 is in kind of an interesting spot because I don't think they're going to pick a quarterback early. I think Geno Smith probably ends up back here. But with Bryce Young still on the board, I'm not really sure how you can pass that up. With Stroud and Richardson going early and a little bit of a twist, Bryce Young is the 3rd quarterback off the board to Seattle at 5. Back in January, it seemed like a foregone conclusion he'd be the number 1 pick, or at least the number 1 quarterback off the board. But I'm starting to believe there's a chance that doesn't happen. The Anthony Richardson hype train has exploded within the last week or so. And as you said, his odds of going number 1 went from plus 10,000 to plus 700. So there are going to be teams who really dislike Richardson as a prospect, but there may be some who really like his physical upside that Bryce Young just doesn't have. The measurables are certainly a little bit of a concern. We'll get more clarity at the combine within the next week and a half. But I think with Bryce Young on the board, it's just too hard for Seattle to pass up. If they do sign Geno to an extension, I don't think this happens. But since that hasn't happened yet, I feel okay with mocking probably the best quarterback in the draft to Seattle here at 5.
And then with pick 6, the Lions are going to be taking Devin Witherspoon, the corner from Illinois. His ceiling, his just projectedness has been shooting up like a rocket lately, and I am loving all the hype for him. Lions have been thrown into Jalen Ramsey trade rumors here and there, and I think even if they were able to get Jalen Ramsey and they still have this pick, getting a corner here is a great idea because Jeff Okudah has shown flashes here and there, and Awarie, who was good in 2021, kind of fell off a bit this year, and the rest of that corner group is not really the greatest. So getting a guy like Devin Witherspoon to secure that secondary with or without a Jalen Ramsey is phenomenal for that future.
So with the 7th pick, I had the Raiders going with my Oregon Duck, Christian Gonzalez. I think him and Witherspoon, for me at least, are probably the 2 best cornerback prospects in the draft. And I have not really seen Gonzalez ever going to the Raiders before, but it does make sense. I thought about Will Levis here. I think the Raiders are going to prefer a veteran to try to compete right away, in particularly Aaron Rodgers. I thought about maybe beefing up the offensive line a little bit, but their defense was so bad last year, I feel like that's the route they have to go with. You could have looked to add another pass rusher to join forces with Max Crosby, but their cornerback room is pretty weak, and I think the value here with Christian Gonzalez is pretty good. I think he would have been a good pick at 6 had the Lions preferred him over Devin Witherspoon, but instead he ends up going here to the Raiders with the 7th pick.
And then with pick 8, the Atlanta Falcons are going to go with the edge rusher from Texas Tech, Tyree Wilson, falling right into their laps. The Falcons have had the worst pass rush in the past 2 years. Their only decent guy is probably Grady Jarrett, and that's about it. They got Arnold Ebiketie last year in the 2nd round, who has shown flashes here and there, but he's still a bit of a project. But getting a guy with such athleticism like Tyree Wilson, who's getting even buzzed to go ahead of a guy like Will Anderson, if you can get that kind of player at 8, that's a surefire way to help solidify that defensive line, at least for the next few years.
With the 9th pick, I had the Carolina Panthers selecting Will Levis, the quarterback out of Kentucky. I'm not the biggest Will Levis fan in the world, but I think if he fell here, it'd be a little bit hard for Carolina to pass him up. They're another team who could look at a veteran. They've been linked to Derek Carr. I think that would make a lot of sense. But if they don't sign a guy like Derek Carr, I don't think they're a real Aaron Rodgers destination. It seems like the Packers would rather keep him out of the NFC if they do trade him. So I think if the Panthers strike out on Carr and Jimmy Garoppolo, they're certainly going to look to invest an early pick into a quarterback. And with Will Levis still on the board, I think he would make sense. Ideally, Carolina can sign a bridge guy who can start maybe for the whole season before Levis comes in, because obviously he is still quite raw, but he does have some good physical tools. And I have seen mocks of him going number 1 before. Teams are really, really going to like him. And if Carolina likes him enough, they'll be glad to pick him here at 9.
With the 10th pick, I have my Philadelphia Eagles going a bit of an oddball here. B.J. Ojulari, the edge rusher from LSU. I love, personally, B.J. Ojulari. I think he's probably my 2nd edge rusher, right behind Will Anderson. He's probably going to go lower in real life than here. But knowing Howie Roseman, knowing how he loves that D-line, he loves that O-line, he's going to want to get a guy to help solidify the trenches in some sort of way. And we don't, as the Eagles, don't have a very the strength athletic guy like a Tyree Wilson or like a Trayvon Walker. So getting a guy like B.J. Ojulari who can give you that speed, that strength, that just freaky athleticism to go on the outside along with Josh Sweat and Hassan Riddick would be phenomenal for that D-line, who was 3rd in sacks all time last year. So being able to keep that D-line together and then bringing in another guy like B.J. Ojulari for the future is perfect.
With the 11th pick, I had the Titans going with Paris Johnson Jr., the offensive tackle out of the Ohio State. The Titans offense needs a lot of help. They've cut a number of their better players this week, including left tackle Taylor Lewan, who's been a mainstay there really for the last decade or so. It seems like the Titans are really starting a rebuild. They might get one of the top quarterbacks next year. With all the guys gone this year and Malik Willis still being fairly unproven, I don't think they would really go that route if one of the guys did fall here. They do need a lot of help at wide receiver. They need a lot of help on the offensive line. And lucky for them, there have been no receivers or offensive linemen picked yet. So they're going to pick Paris Johnson Jr. to be their long-term left tackle for whoever the quarterback of the future ends up being.
And then at pick 12, the Houston Texans are going to get a guy to solidify that defense, Miles Murphy, the edge rusher from Clemson. I think his stock has started to fall a little bit. He's not as freaky as some other guys like Tyree Wilson, like Will Anderson, like B.J. Ojulari. But the Houston Texans will gladly take him up. He has gotten top 5 buzz for a reason, at least previously. He's for sure first-round pick. He's going to be going in the top 15 range. And the Houston Texans, their defense is atrocious. I couldn't name you their best D lineman, maybe Jonathan Grenard. That's about it. But getting a guy on that D line to solidify it and having just a guy to get you those sacks, get you those TFLs, Miles Murphy is going to be that guy for them. So going forward, I think getting an offensive QB and then getting a guy for the defense is probably a perfect first round for the Texans.
With the 13th pick, I had the Jets going with Peter Skoronski, the tackle out of Northwestern. The Jets also need a lot of help on the offensive line for whoever's going to play quarterback next year. I would assume they're probably going to try to get one of the veterans, whether it's Rodgers or Carr, or if they have to settle with Jimmy Garoppolo. It seems like they really want to compete in that division next year, and I think they have the roster to do it. Although the offensive line could use a little bit of help. Mekhi Becton has had a very hard time staying on the field, and even when he is healthy, another tackle could be nice. Skoronski is similar to his Northwestern counterpart, Rashawn Slater, in the sense that they're not the biggest guys. They don't have extremely long arms, so because of that, a lot of people might profile them more as guards. Slater, at least as a rookie, was fantastic at tackle. Last year he was hurt all year, so you can't really knock him for that. So seeing what Rashawn Slater has been able to do, despite maybe not being the prototypical build for a tackle, I think that'll encourage teams with Skoronski, who goes with the exact same pick that Rashawn Slater was.
And then at pick 14, the New England Patriots are going to go a bit of an anti-Bill Belichick pick. Jordan Addison, the receiver from USC. He's going to be that guy who can be a number one receiver. The receiving group for the Patriots the past 5 years has been atrocious. Their number one receiver, Jacoby Myers, is even a free agent this year. And even if they do re-sign them, I think they're going to definitely need some sort of receiving help. And seeing that there's no receivers off the board at this point, I think getting a guy to help Mac Jones or even Bailey Zappi, whoever they end up going with, to elevate their game even further so they don't have to just focus on the run game with Ramondre Stevenson is going to be great.
With the 15th pick, I had the Green Bay Packers selecting Lucas Van Ness, the pass rusher out of Iowa. Green Bay's biggest overall need is probably more playmakers on offense, whether that's adding a wide receiver or a tight end. Only one receiver has been picked so far, Jordan Addison, the previous selection. But Brian Gutekunst is the one making the decisions. We know he's not going to invest a first-round pick into a wide receiver, especially with a guy like Lucas Van Ness on the board, a talented pass rusher with a lot of physical upside. They have to pay Rashawn Gary, which I think is something they probably will and certainly should do. But even so, they could use another complement for him, and I think Lucas Van Ness could make a lot of sense for what they look for.
And then on pick 16, the Washington Commanders are going to go Broderick Jones, the big O tackle at the University of Georgia. The Commanders here are seeing all these tackles, Skoronski and Paris Johnson going off the board, and the last of those great ones is Broderick Jones. And knowing they have a few offensive needs here, tight ends kind of lacking, interior O-line, QB, of course. But knowing that they can try and solidify that blindside blocker at left tackle for next 5-10 years is going to be great for whoever their future QB ends up being, whether it's Sam Howell, whether it's up being Taylor Heineke or some guy drafted next year. I think just getting a guy to solidify that blindside for the future is phenomenal for them.
With the 17th pick, I had the Pittsburgh Steelers selecting Kalijah Kancey, the defensive tackle out of Pitt. So for a second straight year, the Steelers are going to go out of their backyard, grabbing a Pitt Panther in the first round. Obviously, last year it was Kenny Pickett. Kalijah Kancey's name has really risen up boards recently. There's a shot he's the second interior defensive lineman picked, even before a guy like Brian Brzee, who has been getting a lot of hype throughout the season. Cansey's a little bit undersized, but he's a talented player, and the Steelers need some more guys in the middle of that group, and I think this would be pretty solid value in the middle of the first round.
At pick 18, the Detroit Lions are going to go another edge rusher similar to last year, Nolan Smith out of Georgia. It's a bit of an oddball pick, but I think getting a guy to be alongside next to Aiden Hutchinson for the future is going to be great. I think Nolan Smith has a lot more of a higher floor. It's kind of similar to Aiden Hutchinson almost last year. The ceiling there can be, I think, greater than Aiden Hutchinson, but that floor, I think getting those two guys next to each other for that next 10 years is going to be phenomenal. And like I said earlier, the Lions defense is not very good, and I think even I can admit that. But getting that edge rusher and even a future cornerback for the future is going to be phenomenal.
With the 19th pick, I had the Tampa Bay Buccaneers going with Joey Porter Jr., the cornerback out of Penn State. I thought about him at 17 with the Steelers. I ultimately opted for Kancey, and sure enough, Porter won't wait too much longer to see his name go off the board. The Buccaneers are going to be entering a rebuild, it appears, with Tom Brady out the door, thank God. And Joey Porter Jr. is a guy who can slide in early at corner. He doesn't have elite physical traits, at least his speed isn't elite, but he checks pretty much all the other boxes. The Bucs have a lot of their defensive backs expiring within the next couple of years. Sean Murphy-Bunting's a free agent this year. So is Jamel Dean. Both of those guys are going to get pretty big paydays, and I don't think it's going to be from Tampa Bay. They really value having a good secondary, and with two of their better corners gone, they're going to look to replace those guys early here, and they'll do so with Porter at 19.
At pick 20, the Seattle Seahawks are going to be going Brian Brzee, the defensive tackle from Clemson. I think Brzee's stock has fallen as well, kind of was a top 10 projected pick, even a top 5, but now he's starting to slowly fall off boards. At least that's what I've been seeing. But I think Seattle is going to be very happy to have a guy like Brzee. Their run defense was atrocious last year. The front seven in general was very bad, and getting a guy like Brzee who can stop that run and even get to the pass rusher a good bit is going to be great for that future. They have that young core on the offense, at least. The defense, they have Tariq Woolen. They got plenty of guys on the defense and the secondary, but that D-line especially does not have a lot of guys, and they're missing out on a lot of those elite pass rushers, getting Bryce Young even, but getting a guy like Brzee to help solidify that defense for the future is going to be great.
With the 21st pick, I had the LA Chargers selecting Zay Flowers, the wide receiver out of Boston College. Keenan Allen might be gone. Even so, I think the Chargers could really look to add another receiver. They had their big, dominant jump ball winner in Mike Williams. So now you get a true route technician next to him like Zay Flowers, who can try to replicate some of the skill set that Keenan Allen had. They're not necessarily identical players. Keenan Allen's quite a bit taller. But Zay Flowers is a guy who knows how to get open. He's reliable. He's steady. And despite being not the biggest, he is a very, very talented receiver who I think Justin Herbert is really going to like throwing the ball to.
And they have the Baltimore Ravens up at 22. Going to be going receiver Quentin Johnson from TCU. I think he kind of underperformed a little bit in the playoffs. I mean, the entire TCU offense and defense just didn't perform well in the national championship. But either way, Quentin Johnson is a phenomenal player, and I think he is falling a bit, but the Ravens are going to be very happy to get him. The receiving group, as pretty much everyone knows on the Baltimore Ravens, is atrocious. Rashad Bateman has some flashes, but he's been hurt a lot. Devin Duvernay is a return man at heart. And their number ones at the end of the year was, Sammy Watkins and 38-year-old Deshaun Jackson, and it's not going to cut it. Whether they have Lamar or not, I think getting a guy like Quentin Johnson to help whoever that future quarterback ends up being is just going to be great, pairing him along with Rashad Bateman.
With the 23rd pick, I had the Vikings selecting Cam Smith, the corner out of South Carolina. Another guy who doesn't necessarily have elite traits, but he is steady. He's a rock at corner. You can put him on the outside and in the slot. And it's no secret that Minnesota needs secondary. Their defensive backs were horrible this year. I think the defensive coordinator change, adding Brian Flores, will certainly help. But even so, they need some more guys in that secondary badly. I think Cam Smith's a pretty high floor player who can be good right off the bat. And I think that's what Minnesota should prioritize, getting a guy who's going to be really good on day one. Maybe Cam Smith doesn't have the physical traits to be truly elite, But you're getting a guy who's going to be able to produce as a rookie and make the Vikings secondary better than it was last year, which I guess doesn't say a lot, but it's better than nothing.
At 24, the Jacksonville Jaguars are going to be going cornerback out of Georgia, Kelee Ringo. This is a selection that I have liked for the past month or so. He has the physical upside, and he's a bit raw, but whether they keep Shaquille Griffin or not, because they can save a lot of money getting rid of him, getting a guy like Kelee Ringo who can be that elite corner on the outside, like a Jalen Ramsey like they used to have, is going to be phenomenal, pairing him with young Tyson Campbell and even learning a bit from a guy like Darius Williams. He's going to be a little bit of a project, and it's going to take a little bit of time, but I think if they can develop Ringo perfectly or even enough, he's going to be a possibly top 15, top 10 corner, and in a loaded AFC, getting a great elite corner is going to be perfection to getting out of that divisional or even the AFC championship into the Super Bowl.
With the 25th pick, I went for a little bit of the curveball for the Giants as I had them picking Michael Mayer, the tight end out of Notre Dame. The Giants' biggest need is certainly adding some pass catchers. They need weapons for probably Daniel Jones or whoever ends up starting there next year. I don't see them getting rid of Jones. I think he's either extended or franchise tagged. Wide receiver on paper for them is really bad, but I couldn't find any obvious fit here. Maybe Josh Downs from UNC, although I think it's a little bit early. There maybe were some other guys that you could have considered here. But I had them going with Michael Mayer instead. I think they just need somebody who has a high floor, who's steady and reliable. The Giants did draft tight end Daniel Bellinger in the 4th round last year, and when he was healthy, he was honestly pretty good. But I don't think having Daniel Bellinger should stop you from picking a guy like Michael Mayer. It's a loaded tight end class, and I could see them preferring a different option. Dalton Kincaid out of Utah is really good. I think Luke Musgrave from Oregon State is going to go earlier than people expect. Darnell Washington's a big, dominant, physical blocker. But I think Michael Mayer is the safest of the group, and the Giants just need guys who are steady receivers who can make plays right off the bat.
And then the NFC rival, the Dallas Cowboys, are going to be going Bijan Robinson, the running back out of Texas. It pains me to make this selection as an Eagles fan, but it's a perfect fit at this point. Zeke has been rumored to be taking a giant pay cut, and whether he ends up taking it or even gets cut, they're going to need a running back with Tony Pollard out the door. And even if Zeke isn't cut this year, he's probably gone within the next 2-3 years at the most. So getting a guy like Bijan Robinson is going to be phenomenal for that offense. They do need a lot of playmakers. CeeDee Lamb is great, and Michael Gallup is a fine number 2 receiver when he's healthy. But besides those two guys, they don't really have much with Pollard at the door. Zeke's been falling off a train pretty much. So getting a guy in state can be phenomenal for that offense, and getting a guy that can help Dak Prescott not have to play hero ball and let him just work on the ground game and just make Dak not have to do as much with how many picks he threw is going to be great for that Dallas offense.
With the 27th pick, I had the Bills going with Brian Branch, the safety out of the University of Alabama. A lot of people are mocking the Bills a running back. I don't really get it. Yeah, a guy like Jahmyr Gibbs would be a lot of fun here, but they drafted James Cook in the 2nd round last year. I think he was better than people realize. And if you go back to their game against the Bengals that they lost in the divisional round, there are some clear flaws the Bills have on both sides of the ball, particularly in the trenches. But they also could look to get younger at safety. Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer are both getting older. Both of them are not going to be on the Bills for a whole lot longer. And the value of Brian Branch here is too good to pass up. He's very versatile. You can put him at safety. You can put him in the nickel. They do have some very good corners. Teron Johnson's very solid in the slot. But overall, I think the value here with Brian Branch is a little bit too much to pass up as the Bills add another young playmaker to the secondary.
Pick 28, Cincinnati Bengals. We're going to a little bit of an oddball here. Jackson Smith and the Jigba, receiver out of OSU. The amount of times I've seen T. Higgins in a trade rumor is growing by the day. They're not looking to want to pay him, and Tyler Boyd is going to be a free agent next year. So whether they end up keeping at least one of them, they're going to need that third receiver, or even if they don't bring any back, they're going to need a second receiver besides Jamar Chase. So getting a guy like Jackson Smith and the Jigba is going to be great for that offense. Getting another guy for Joe Burrow to work with besides Jamar Chase. Chase was a little bit injured last year, so T. Higgins was stepping up. T. Higgins looked great last year. And I wouldn't be shocked if he got traded for at least a first-round pick with how good he's been playing. But whether they keep Higgins or not, they're going to end up needing a receiver within the next 2 years. So getting a guy like JSN to learn under Jamar Chase, to learn under that offensive guru that they have in there, it's going to be phenomenal for that offense.
With the 29th pick, I had the New Orleans Saints getting Keion White, the edge rusher out of Georgia. His stock really seems to be rising, and I wouldn't be surprised if it goes up even higher after the combine. I really thought about Jahmyr Gibbs here. I kind of think Gibbs will be a first-round pick when it's all said and done. I think he's also going to blow people away at the combine. But I think for where the Saints are, I don't think you should look to pick a running back at this point. I understand Alvin Kamara is getting a little bit older. He has the legal troubles with him as well. But the Saints roster is getting up there in age. They're an older group, and obviously they are in cap hell at the moment. So I think looking to get younger in terms of pass rushing could be helpful. Marcus Davenport might not be a guy you want to pay long-term. Peyton Turner in the first round just has not really worked out. So getting a guy like Keion White, who's got some very solid upside, despite being a little bit older of a prospect, already being 24, I think he would be a nice addition to their front unit.
And at pick 30, the Eagles will be going offensive guard out of Florida, Osiris Torrance. I alluded to a bit earlier how he loves his O-line, and getting a great interior lineman like Osiris Torrance is going to be great for that O-line. The O-line on the Eagles is already great as it is. Kelsey might end up retiring, but even if he does, we have Cole Jurgens, I think his name is, right behind him, ready to go. And Sayamalo is probably at the door for our right guard spot. So getting a guy that you can just plug in right then and there at right guard, alongside Lane Johnson, learn from Landon Dickerson, the Pro Bowler, learn from Lane Johnson right next to him. It's going to be phenomenal.
And with the final pick of the day at 31, the Super Bowl champion Kansas City Chiefs select Darnell Wright, the tackle out of Tennessee. Orlando Brown is a free agent this offseason. They could use some help at right tackle as well. I believe they had Andrew Wiley start there. He played well in the Super Bowl, but I don't think he's a long-term piece. Lucas Niang hasn't really shown that he can stay healthy. Darnell Wright's probably more of a right tackle off the bat, so ideally you bring Orlando Brown back and have him and Wright as your tackle duo. I thought about DeJuan Jones as well from Ohio State. He's going to put up some ridiculous numbers at the combine, specifically with his measurements. But Darnell Wright's a guy who I think people are sleeping on. I think he will end up being a first-round pick, even though he's not getting a lot of first-round buzz. And I think here at 31, the Kansas City Chiefs would really like that pick. So there you go. That'll wrap up our first dual mock draft. If you have any final words for the people, let them out.
Not much. Just hoping Howie Roseman doesn't draft another receiver, and go Birds.
So that'll wrap it up. I hope everybody enjoyed. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you are new. We're going to be back with a new episode of the podcast pretty soon, along with other NFL draft-related stuff. So make sure to stay tuned, and yeah, that'll do it. Peace out.